everybody. Welcome back to the impact stage, or welcome to the impact stage if this is the first session you're joining in on today with me. This is a great session for you to pop into, so I'm very excited to introduce our next speakers. You probably joined because you saw that our set topic today is AI regulation. We're staying ahead of it. We're learning what we need to know, and we're going to hear from Shannon and Ann on what this looks like going forward. So Shannon McCracken is the founding president and CEO of the Nonprofit Alliance and a four-time honoree on the Nonprofit Times Power and Influence Top 50. Her leadership experience includes roles as Charity Navigator's CDO and VP of Donors Development at Special Olympics. Shannon is a certified association executive with a master's in nonprofit management and serves on multiple committees, including the Fundraising AI Advisory Council. So obviously we are extra thrilled to have Shannon with us today. She's joined by Ann Hollingsworth, who's a seasoned government relations specialist with expertise in policy analysis and international relations. Most recently, Ann served as Senior Director of Government Relations and Senior Policy Advisor at Refugees International, where she led the organization's advocacy efforts within the U.S. foreign policy community. Previously, Ann represented International Crisis Group as Senior Analyst for U.S. Advocacy and Research, led targeted advocacy with senior Washington policy audiences, including the State Department, the White House, USAID, and Congress. Ann is the VP of Government Affairs at the Nonprofit Alliance, and we are thrilled to have them with us today. Shannon and Ann, please take it from here and share your insights.
Okay, Ann, here we go.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
All right, let's jump right in, Ann. According to Twilio, and this has been cited by Donor Search and others, 58% of nonprofits now leverage AI in communications, and 68% use it for data analysis. So help us understand, what are some of the compliance challenges that could come up as regulations develop and evolve in these two common use cases?
Shannon, thank you so much. And again, welcome to everyone for participating today. We're going to talk a lot and dig in a little deeper on a lot of thematic issues, but, around sort of some general compliance challenges for nonprofits. I wanted to talk about kind of three core issues for us to get us going today. First, more generally, is just the data piece for nonprofits and what that means, particularly when we talk about data privacy and the risk exposure for particularly small organizations, has come up in multiple conversations that we at the Nonprofit Alliance have had as we continue to educate ourselves and formulate policy recommendations on the issues around artificial intelligence and nonprofits. And what's come up a few times is particularly the fact that, smaller nonprofits are dealing obviously with smaller budgets. And so when we talk about what liability means and what that means for those that that cannot afford to either sort of really invest in the protection of their data just because of financial constraints, that is a really important factor that's come out in some of our conversations. But equally, what that translates to is they're in no way ready to defend any legal challenges or lawsuits that could happen as a result. And so the liability piece is another angle that has been brought up to us, particularly for the smaller organization side, but obviously for the larger nonprofit sector as well. If they have not looked ahead, if they have not invested in this, and they are not ready for that piece. The second is sort of tied to data, and that means cybersecurity, which is really critical. And this has come out in some conversations we've had, particularly around reputational risk for nonprofits. So what we mean by that is looking at issues around, how nonprofits are using AI technology for hiring, which we'll talk about more in depth in just a minute, but also the issue around how AI is being used in sort of U.S. law enforcement, how facial recognition is being used. And many factors that I think a lot of nonprofits are not thinking about right now. A specific example would be nonprofit organizations that are working on immigration issues. and they have clients coming to their office, and what their office building security is like, what is being recorded, the access the government has to that information and those videos. That is an issue that I think is really important, but obviously well outside the immigration space. What that means for our responsibility to protect those that we serve. And typically around cybersecurity, a lot of conversations will happen around legislation and what that, could look like, should look like. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, about some of particularly the areas of interest for state regulation, and also talk about the appetite on Capitol Hill right now as well. But the third bucket here, just to get us going, is the concerns on public trust. And I really want to emphasize, obviously, this gets into, the enormous support in public polling of nonprofits on their reputation, on the value that citizens have in trusting these organizations. And what's come out, obviously, in the public, in nonprofit conversations, and in particularly state legislatures and on Capitol Hill, is concerns from both parties about misleading messaging and ads in AI. And so that is a direct, talking point to what we're looking at today, which is, what can the public trust, and how can nonprofits really get ahead of that to maintain the trust that that the public has for the nonprofit sector. It's really, I think, a core idea for today's conversation. Shannon?
Yeah, and that was great. And that was a lot right out of the gate. And I want to pick up on a question that Nicole asked us already in chat about how can smaller nonprofits without policy teams, or I'll even expand that to without council, stay proactive on AI regulations without being overwhelmed. That without being overwhelmed, we should underscore that a little bit. And so pulling out some of the pieces of your the comments you just shared, it's that liability piece, it's the reputational risk. It's thinking specifically about your programmatic or your mission focus, what sort of data you're collecting, how are you engaging with beneficiaries, how is AI sort of a conduit for some of those interactions. If you have a helpline that has an AI bot-fed answers, or some components like that, if you have AI that you're using for some of your data processing, all those pieces that can be factors. I'd throw out two more specific answers to Nicole's question. One is if you're using counsel for your cybersecurity audits, or for your looking at your data privacy policy and updating that, that's a good place to see if there's also capacity and expertise in AI, and kind of bundling some of those together. That can be a good starting point particularly for smaller nonprofits. And then this is something I think a lot of nonprofits overlook as an opportunity, but a board role. Is there a board role, particularly if your organization is smaller but more on the leading edge of using AI or testing AI in some new ways that perhaps your peer organizations are not? Is there somebody that could be brought onto the board to provide some of that guidance and leadership and do a little bit of that contribution of expertise in their governance role? So, in the current White House administration, let's spend a few minutes there. The current administration is taking a very different approach to AI and AI regulation than we saw in the last administration. That's abundantly clear if you put their executive orders side by side. Can you, what do we need to know about the current administration's stance on AI and what may come from that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so in July, the Trump administration released its AI action plan. And this followed up from its earlier executive order this year that was entitled Removing Barriers to American Leadership in Artificial Intelligence. And typically when we see an action plan from an administration, maybe sometimes our expectations are low. But I will say that this had more specifics than I anticipated it having. And the key factors for the nonprofit sector are the following. The initial action plan that they are going to really invest in is not surprisingly, focused on infrastructure and data center section. So really only focused on the job creation angle, as opposed to the reported noise, environmental pollution, and energy consumption due to the data centers being created. So really it's protecting the AI sort of sector, private sector, and really focused on the job creation aspect of what AI is doing. The second thing is really pushing, and this was very, very clear, for a lack of oversight on AI. And, it actually went further in the AI action plan by threatening retribution to states that actually do regulate AI. So this is really, I think, a very important talking point for us as nonprofits to understand that because there is ongoing legislation, some passed in individual states, on some aspects of AI, the administration really put a marker down to say, leave AI companies alone. And if you don't, we're going to, there will be a cost to it. The other factor for nonprofits in the AI action plan is the administration's definition of bias, which I think in our view may be counter to the perspective of many nonprofits. How that is defined by the administration of bias, I think is going to be particularly important given the level of scrutiny on the nonprofit sector by this administration. So tying that into some of the recent congressional hearings on the matter that actually had leaders in the AI sector, private sector, the impressions and messaging was very clear. They were saying, we are regulating ourselves and we don't need you to do that when there were questions from Congress. And so where we're at right now is the administration having a very hands-off approach, don't even think about oversight. When there are individual states, New York, Maine, and a few others that have already been proactive on some of the concerns around AI and wanting to do some regulation around those issues.
So interesting about states regulating and now the administration talking about retribution for those states. The Nonprofit Alliance has done a lot of work around data privacy, and we're always talking about the problems of a patchwork quilt where lots of different states have lots of different frameworks for data privacy regulation, which is why we want to see one federal standard that everybody follows. So are we kind of getting what we've wished for with AI? Is it more likely that a federal standard for AI will become the law of the land with the way that the administration has queued this up? What could we expect there?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think that, given the Republican control of the House and the Senate, most of the legislation that's getting any sort of media pickup is legislation that is directly in line with the Trump administration. For an example, most recently, Senator Cruz introduced legislation about a week and a half ago, basically reiterating less regulation for AI is what our policy should be. And so that in no way, I think, muffles the very real concerns that have been raised by both parties, concerns around privacy issues, around public trust and mistrust. And again, that has been voiced in multiple hearings from both parties. But, where we're at right now is I don't see any way an AI federal bill will pass that will have any substantial regulation tied to it under this current Congress. And so, there could be some smaller pieces of AI legislation in support of the Trump administration and its hands-off approach. But as far as, some substantial areas of focus that have been highlighted in example, Pennsylvania targeting AI scammers on behalf of their communities, or New York putting regulations in for AI and hiring practices with fines for violations. I think that is going to remain a state level approach because I don't think this Congress really has the appetite to do that, despite, I think, some interest, quite frankly, from both parties on some of the concerns we're talking about today.
So let's look Let's look more broadly outside of the United States and the EU. And Stephen dropped a question in chat about this as well. The EU was way ahead of the United States when it came to data privacy regulation with GDPR. Where do they, how does their AI policy compare to what we're seeing as what I describe as a bit more of a hands-off approach that we're seeing right now in the US?
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right, Shannon, and that this is something that the EU deserves a lot of credit for. The way I would put it is, they were taking a visionary look at AI during a time when many felt that the AI train was about to leave the station, and now it has absolutely left the station. So I think they showed a vision. When you look at the EU AI Act, you're talking about some very clear outlines of the possible threats that the AI may bring, and really tying in roles, particularly on oversight, that I think is really important for us to talk about. One is financial punishments for those companies that don't comply. And that means fines, that could be in the tens of millions, or as they laid out, 7% of a company's revenue, whichever is higher. And also the enforcement factor, which, as it's laid out now, will be conducted by separate regulators in each of the 27 member states in coordination with the new EU AI office and EU AI board. A reminder, the AI Act is expected to take full effect in 2026 or 2027, so we're not quite there yet. But what was interesting also was the issues that the EU AI Act mirrored, that some of the US states are starting to, as I briefed already, started to look at, including particularly that hiring process piece and the use of AI and the need for transparency in that, including data protection around that. So some of that is being mirrored at some of the steps domestically that the US is taking. And, again, I think the EU deserves a lot of credit for showing some leadership on this issue at a really important time.
And let's jump ahead 3 or 5 years, which feels like a lifetime from now sometimes. but thinking ahead 3 to 5 years from now, like, what do you believe will be the most significant regulatory concerns or challenges or opportunities for nonprofits when it comes to AI regulation and policy?
Sure. So we discussed data and cybersecurity, but just want to reiterate a couple of things from that. One is the importance of really investing, and that means in your budgets for what this is going to mean as far as outsourcing additional support, having, as Shannon was suggesting, having a board member with a level of expertise on the issue. Something more broadly, though, in general, is really having a point person to be tracking this. Despite the earlier question of those that don't have policy staff, I think the AI issue and how that's going to affect nonprofits really needs to be prioritized in senior leadership, to be tracking, as this is a very fluid situation, and that means tracking, in your state where you are based, as well as federal messaging around this issue. So that doesn't mean hire 10 policy staff, but having someone to really track that, I think, is really important. So I do want to sort of, since we're talking about kind of the next 3 to 5 years, something that has come up in conversations in the nonprofit sector we've had on AI is really the imperative of balancing the automation piece with human connection. And so really reiterating in your messaging, and that of course includes with your donor base, but with your members, with the public, that human component of the work that you do, because of the lack of trust and some of the use of AI and ads. We've talked about that, but really kind of tying in, how can we as a nonprofit maintain that human component of the work that we do, to ensure that our authenticity remains and that we are that trusted resource. Again, looking 3 to 5 years, right now, there is a job creation boom in the AI sector right now in the United States. We don't know if that's going to continue. And I think if there's a lack of regulation on some of the issues I highlighted on environmental impacts and energy consumption, especially in rural areas of the United States, I think that could become more of a front and center issue if state regulations and federal regulations do not move forward. And then also, I want to emphasize that there's steps that the AI sector is making on guardrails, and this is in reaction to some of the criticism of some of the AI messaging, particularly to young people, being a factor in some of their behaviors, including the committing of crimes. But there's no appetite, I think, for a federal piece of legislation, and so some of those AI guardrails that have been pushed through, I think, public engagement, we'll see what the next layer of potential guardrails that AI is willing to do. And particularly if some of those that we described today for the nonprofit sector will be included in that. In my view, I think that has to come from policymakers and showing some clear messaging and appetites for why some of these issues are of concern and require federal or state legislation.
So we only have about 2 minutes left, Anne, and I want to grab a question out of Q&A that's gotten a couple votes. Jennifer asked, what about fundraising tools that come with AI built in or adding it? Does that transfer responsibility onto the software company? And I'll take a first stab at this and say the answer is sometimes. That it's, I know it's tempting and easy, especially for smaller organizations that don't have in-house counsel, to review service provider contracts for something like somebody who's doing some of your data processing or adding on something to your fundraising program and kind of look at it and feel confident in signing it. And this is a place where it may be worth having counsel, bringing in an attorney to review it for you, looking specifically at that, like what is the indemnification, where does the responsibility sit, who owns the data, who owns the information that's collected and inferred, what happens with that, how is it protected, what is the disclosure that's required. There are a lot of complicated questions there, and as you noted earlier, depending on the state that you're in or the cause area or the types of population or individuals that you're working with, that can enter new areas of complexity that maybe even that service provider hasn't fully encountered or fleshed out yet, because some of it's changing quickly. So I do think it's a fantastic question to ask here, and more importantly, ask with your partner and to bring in counsel to review that. Anything you would add, Anne, to that thought?
I would just, I did want to get this in before we closed, is actually that ties into the broader issue of really understanding the AI tools and what that means for the information that you are inputting. This came up in multiple conversations in us with nonprofits, really talking about, so could this information be on the front page of the New York Times tomorrow? And so it really is going to take, I think, some energy to really dive into what does this mean for some of the AI tools that we're using for other aspects, not just the fundraising side of the organization, to ensure that our data is protected.
And very much comes back to that trust piece. There's the legal question, and then there's the perceived trust with our donors and our constituents. So this session has flown by. I think we are just about out of time. I do want to share a resource in the chat here, which is on the Nonprofit Alliance's website. It is the page where we track the policy and some of the what's coming up, things to monitor on AI, and particularly at the federal congressional level. So it's a place where you can find some good content. And on behalf of Anne and me and the Nonprofit Alliance, thanks so much for joining us today at the FAI Summit.
Thank you all.
Hello, everybody, back again. And check out the link that we just posted in the, pinned in the chat. And also check out the Nonprofit Alliance. If this was enlightening to you, if you have thoughts about how you can apply this work going forward, I'm seeing some great thank yous in the chat. If you are curious to learn more, to hear more from Shannon and Anne and their perspective on some complex topics and a lot of nuance, but they bring a lot of insight to help us navigate some of these real challenges, and the Nonprofit Alliance can help you do that as well. As always, we're going to ask for your feedback on this session. If there's something that was shared that was particularly interesting, something you learned, something you want to learn more about, let us know. And we'll pass along your thoughts and feedback to Shannon and Anne, and we'll also use this to inform future fundraising AI content and events. So we love to hear from you. Take a moment, let us know what you think. I'm also going to quickly jump into what's coming up next. We have some fantastic sessions and on all three stages. So on the Amplify stage, we've got closing the gap between insights and action, how AI can help you more human in donor conversations. That's by Brian Funk and Coach Tivy at Practivated. You've probably heard a lot about Practivated throughout the summit from our co-founder, Mallory Erickson. So highly encourage you to check that out. On the innovation stage, we've got Smart, Safe, and Compliant, a practical approach to AI compliance for fundraisers. So another session that's going to be really important for folks who are adopting AI and looking to do this responsibly, to do this transparently, to do this in a way that doesn't risk trust, but actually it builds trust and enables us to feel really confident in what we're doing. I've seen a lot of questions about that. So encourage you to join that session if you'd like to learn more. And here on the impact stage, we are going to cover the next era of segmentation, the annual giving, where annual giving meets AI. So we will kick that off in just a moment. In the meantime, I want to remind everybody how to navigate to the schedules. So you've done this a bunch of times already today and yesterday, but if you go to the top button on your screen that says schedule, click that, it'll open up. You can join any of the three sessions that I just mentioned. We're really looking forward to having you in in all of those. And if you miss a session that you're interested in, the session recordings will be available as a reminder. So hopefully I'll see you back here on the impact stage in just a few moments. And we'll see you soon.